brought to you by BetMGM, the king of sportsbooks. My name's Matt Moore. I'm the senior NBA writer for the Action Network, joined by NBA futures analyst Brandon Anderson. And this is your Western Conference Finals, Wolves Mavericks series preview and best bets. We will give you best bets on the series. We will break down all the angles. We'll talk about how to bet the series price. We'll talk about what we think about how the matchups are going to go. We will talk about props. We will talk about game ones. We will talk about all sorts of stuff on this podcast for you to enjoy. If you'd like more on this series, make sure to check out the Action Network app. I say this before every episode. If you're a longtime listener and you're like, well, I like the pod, but I haven't downloaded the app. All right. Even if you just want to track scores, you are not going to get a better one than the Action Network app. Like, I've timed it. Like, we're ahead of the other ones. Our API is faster. You're going to get faster results, quicker up to the second information on what's going on in the games, play-by-play data, as well as if you're listening to this podcast, you like the betting side, you get to see that the series price. You'll be able to watch those things change as it updates, as well as in-game stuff. Make sure to check out the Action Network app. Also, go to youtube.com/the Action Network. This podcast is going up on Tuesday afternoon, on Tuesday night and Wednesday night, following game one of the Eastern and Western Conference Finals. We will have Buckets Live. Michael Phil is going to join me tonight. We'll break down ECF game one, talk about all sorts of things as far as like what do we take away from the series, how do we adjust, is the market overreacting to game two? Fiddle is one of the best, in my opinion, that we have on analyzing the market. He's so sharp on stuff like that, so make sure to check out Buckets Live on both Tuesday and Wednesday night of the conference finals. All right, Brandon, it's your Minnesota Timberwolves versus not my Dallas Mavericks, as I love all teams. I want good things for teams. I thought that the 2011 Mavericks is the most I've ever been happy for a team. That is the most I've ever been happy for a team. One of my favorite moments in my career was seeing Dirk Nowitzki walk by with the Finals MVP trophy and the sheer joy on his face. I adored that team, that guy, that squad. I like this franchise. This one driven me a little bit nuts, and their fans are just absolutely up my ass, and I'm a little sick of it. So it's your Wolves versus my not Mavs. What is your best bet for Timberwolves with a chance to go to their first NBA Finals versus the Dallas Mavericks?
Man, my heart is heavily invested on this one. So I will just say up front, my heart is so invested that my wallet will be a little less invested on this series. And also, I just think it's a very tight, very close series. So as usual, rather than shrug my shoulders and come with, I don't really know, I've got this bet, but I'll sit this one out. I've got like 6 angles instead because I kept digging till I found more things that I liked. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make the bet I wanted to make on Dallas each of the last 2 rounds, but didn't take because it was juiced, and talked myself into a different bet that lost instead. I'm just going to take the over 5.5 games. It's minus 160. It's the bet I wanted on Dallas each of the last 2 rounds. It hit. I didn't hit it because I got too aggressive and went with more. So I want just the over. Both of my best bets in this round, Matt, are juiced bets. Minus 340 on the Eastern Conference Finals. Listen to that one. Minus 160 here. I've got a couple of series props we'll get to. My favorite one, Anthony Edwards to score 40 points in a game at least one time, is even odds. That's my favorite. You might talk me into picking a side on this one for a bet. I know which one it will be. I need some help getting there. We'll get to that later.
All right. I have 2 best bets for this series, and they are the Dallas Mavericks plus 150 on the series price. Dallas Mavericks minus 1.5 at plus 240 at BetMGM, the king
Slanderous
of sportsbooks. The problem, like, Wolves fans think I hate them, and I'm like, guys, I think this team is elite. Like, it's really annoying because I'm like, where were you back in January when I was like, I think the Wolves could win the title?
You've been picking Minnesota to do good things all year long. You are very charitably leading the podcast with calling them my Wolves. They have been your Wolves the entire season. They can be
Well,
our Wolves for this podcast.
no. These are, let's be very clear on this. These are Joe Delera's Wolves.
That's true. That's very true. But
Joe said Wolves to win the title back on long shots, and I made noises. So you can go back and listen to that if you go through the feed. So yeah, look, I love this Wolves team. I think that they're amazing. I think they're incredible. And I'll be really upfront. I think the Wolves are a much better team. I think they're a much better team than the Dallas Mavericks. I don't bet series. I don't look at series through the prism of just like, well, they're just better. And every time that I've done that, it's wound up with a result that I've been like, I should have paid more attention to the matchups. It is just very rare that I'm like, oh, this team was just way better. It's just very rare that winds up being
funny. It's very funny. Sorry to interrupt you. It's very funny because I have the exact opposite experience. Yeah. When there's a team, I'm just like, nah, they're just better. The Timberwolves are just better than the Suns. And then I was like, no, but the matchups, I got to pay attention to the matchups. And I dug into all the matchups and I changed my mind totally. I go the other way. It's just like, that's it. I'm better at the big picture thing. You're better at the matchups thing. So we should each trust our strengths, I guess.
Yeah. And so I'll just kind of start here because this is an X's and O's heavy preview versus like Celtics Pacers, where it's like the ephemeral, how much are the Celtics going to fuck this up? This is much more of like an actual tactical series.
Yes.
So I'll just start right here. The Wolves have the best defense I've seen in 20 years, and that was evident in what they did to the reigning champion defending Denver Nuggets. That was absolutely an incredible defensive performance. They have been awesome defensively the entire year, and in games 1 through the first 6 games of the playoffs were some of the most impressive defense I've seen any team play ever in the playoffs. The problem for me starts with the types of things that they're built to defend. And Jokic said after the last series, he said, well, they were kind of built to beat us. And it's true. I push back a little on the idea that they were intentionally built this way, because like I know some of the inner workings of how the Rudy Gobert trade happened, and it wasn't like, we have to beat Denver, let's go get Rudy Gobert. Like that was not the thought process. But it worked out that way. And they are very well built as a counter to Denver. Denver is obviously, with Jokic, an interior, inside-out team. They want to attack the rim. They want to dominate in points in the paint. They work around Jokic in the post or in the pinch post up high. And his ability to score on the interior and create open dunks, cuts, etc. is what makes them so good. The Mavericks are the exact opposite of that. Dallas is a perimeter-oriented, start on the outside, then work your way in, and then once the defense collapses, kick to the outside team. That's still at their core who they are offensively. They've added a lot of tricks and whistles that I have to give the coaching staff a lot of credit for. This is a much more complex team than they were in any of the previous iterations of Luka Doncic's playoff career. So they are better built to put Luka off ball, to use mechanisms off ball to create better looks when Luka draws attention, all of those types of things. But at their core, they are still Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving creating things in pick and roll, in high pick and roll on the perimeter. The Wolves' best defender, without question, is Jaden McDaniels. There's a reason Ant shouts him out constantly every single series. And the last series was a really great Jaden McDaniels series because he got to guard Jamal Murray or KCP or Reggie Jackson. Jaden McDaniels is a $190. He's 190 pounds. Okay. He is 6'9", which is insane, but he is extremely tall and very lanky, and so he's great at getting over screens to contest. The problem is that Luka Doncic's entire game, he has obviously, like, Luka's one of the best offensive players in the league. He has an extremely well-rounded skill set. His footwork is superb, all of this stuff. It starts with Luka's strength. And so Luka's going to be able to body Jaden throughout this series, and they don't have a counter beyond Ant, which risks foul trouble. So from the very get-go of this series, I'm like, Luka Doncic should have an easier time than he did with Lou Dort, your personal favorite. We're not going to talk about Dort. I don't want to talk about Dort. I do want to talk about, can I have the last word on this? Just, can you give me this one and I'll give you the last word on like Wolves in general? Because like,
he was the right defender for Luka. He defended him well. He is a better defender for Luka than Minnesota has. Absolutely.
Okay. Like, there's like a lot of like, Lou Dort's not good, he just fouls. I'm like, Lou Dort's an amazing defender. He's so good and he's so physical. Jaden's not built that way. He's a really great defender and he can get up into your dribble and those type of things. but Luka's really going to body him. Now, I think Jaden can do work on Kyrie Irving. I don't like this series for Kyrie. But
Agreed.
once we start with, if we look back at the regular season matchups, which there's very little you can take from these, they were all before the trades that Dallas made. Luka missed one of the games. Like, it's all messy. But if we look at the top 4 defenders that he went up against, Kyle Anderson, Jaden McDaniels, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and Kyle Anderson. Okay, Anthony Edwards and Kyle Anderson. The top 4 defenders that Luka went up against, he shot 68% from the field. Okay, regular season, I get it. I'm not saying he's going to shoot 68%. I'm saying that I don't look at this and be like the Wolves can bother him the way Rudy Gobert, and to his and eternal credit, Karl Anthony Towns defended Nikola Jokic. Let's start right there with Mavs on offense. I think this is much more of a Luka series than either of the previous 2 series were for Dallas.
I do too. That's where I agree with all of that, really. I think Jaden is too small by his stature. I think Nickeil Alexander Walker is smaller, so that's not necessarily going to be the solution. I wonder, I do think this feels to me like a Kyle Anderson series. Like, yep. I think maybe he gets a little bit more run than Nickeil Alexander Walker. His the craftiness and the strength and the not really just burn by you speed thing, that feels like an Anderson defensive matchup who's would be interesting, because what he does offensively is interesting also, and adds a little bit to what, like, he hasn't really been able to do much the last couple of series. So
nope.
That could add to what I think might be a depth advantage already for Minnesota if he's viable again. So I don't know if that will work, but it's not great that can add some depth advantage, adding your 8th or 9th guy back in, because that's the only possible solution you have to Anderson. Joe Dallaire and I talked on his podcast, Cash That, about could Naz Reid be the answer for Luka? That was his idea. I don't know that I buy that as far as a defender, but just, again, same sort of thing I think as Kyle Anderson, as like a bigger, stockier strength sort of thing.
Yep.
The answer is there's not a matchup. Like, there's not a guy. I agree with you. It's not going to be a great Kyrie series. Last round against Oklahoma City, I thought the move for OKC was, we've got the dudes to shut down Kyrie. We've got Chet to shut down the rim. Go ahead, Luka. If you beat us 1-on-5, we'll clap and we'll tip our hat to you. I don't know if Minnesota has any real choice but to do that. I think that they kind of need to do that, because they've got dudes that can hang with Kyrie. Ant shouted out, and immediately after Game 7, I got my matchup as Kyrie. Like, Ant's been an awesome defender and has really stepped up that part of his game, especially in the playoffs, consistent night after night. So, and obviously, like, Rudy at the rim is going to be able to handle things very well. That's the whole point of him. So I think it comes down to just what can Luka give. And truthfully, we don't really know the answer to that, because he actually hasn't been as good this year as he has been. Like, I've been the Luka playoffs guy. I've been the one being like, yeah, I know they haven't actually won the series, but his numbers have been incredible. This year, his numbers haven't been incredible. His scoring is down like 4 or 5 points a game from his usual playoffs. He's barely 30% on threes. His twos are down. His free throws are down. He has just under 6 BPM so far for the playoffs. Like, he's normally like a 10 plus dude. So that's a big drop off. He's sub 54% true shooting. And now he's facing the best defense in the league this year. Not necessarily the best one for him, but I think that it is a terrifying thought as a Timberwolves fan to say, all right, Luka, let's see what you can do. That is a horrifying thought, because he has been so good in the past. But I don't know if that's the version that we have right here. And I think, too, if you look at what Dallas has done to get here, and I tweeted about this yesterday, I don't think Dallas is here in this round because of Luka and Kyrie being supernova.
Nope.
They're here because of the 3 through 8 guys. They're here because Lively and Gafford have been great. PJ Washington, Derek Jones Jr. If you look at last round, after game 1, OKC won the first game. After game 1, you take PJ games 2, 3, and 4, and then Derek Jones game 5 and 6. The guys that were getting the looks, that player, quote unquote, over those 5 games averaged 24 points a game and hit 24 of 45 threes, 53%. If that dude, Derek Jones, PJ, whatever, the combo dude, if that's a real thing, that's a real problem. I think there's a lot of outlier shooting in there, but to me, Minnesota's defense shouldn't let that happen. And if you can take away the PJ and the Derek Jones of it all, keep Kyrie somewhat contained, he's going to still hit shots. It's Kyrie, but somewhat. If you can take that away, I think they can take away some of the lobs, some of the easy stuff at the rim. That's Rudy's job. I don't know. Can Luka really beat an entire defense on his own? I think that's the question Minnesota's going to ask. I think Luka point overs early in the series as Minnesota says, okay, go ahead, buddy, until they have to adjust. I think that probably happens that way. A guy who I have my eye on that I want to know what you think X's and O's wise. I don't know if he'll even play this series. If Maxi Kleber can play in the series, I think that's a very big swing factor because of how he can guard Cat and because of how he might pull Rudy away from the rim. And that's like the one guy Dallas has. Like, that's not Gafford. That's not Lively. Actually, when Dallas did so well against Gobert, it's because they went 5 out, and they're not a 5 out team right now. They've got a center always. So this is actually an easier spot for Rudy. I think if Maxi plays, that's actually a really big swing depth-wise for Dallas. Rudy rebounding unders, even series possibly. I think that's a swing if it goes late and Maxi comes back. Do you think that, I know you were big on Maxi, I forget, one of the 2 series against Clippers, you thought he was like the swing guy, right?
Yeah, he was the biggest. I mean, he was. Like, he won that series for them. Kid used him in both 5-out lineups and in combo 4-5s. So they were able to battle when the Mavs or when the Clippers were like, oh, okay, so you're going to go small. Cool. So we'll just go smaller. And that's like Ty Lue's like big lever that he gets considered to be one of these top 5 coaches for. Sorry, but a little bit crazy with Ty Lue. He got coached by Jason Kidd this year. That was the lever. It's like, oh, let's just pull this lever and then we'll just go smaller. And then Kidd, in a really impressive coaching adjustment, was like, well, what if I just play them together? And so now I have the ability to play 4 out. I am still playing big, but I have more shooters than you do. And we have more rebounding. So I get to crush you on the glass and I'm not giving up shooting. And that counter was really massive. If Kleber comes back, I like the series even more for the Mavs. I think they can win it without, but there is a lot of talk about Kleber being available at the back half of the series, and depending on how long it goes. And yeah, so they don't have to put Gobert on him. But then the question is like, are you going to put then Rudy on like Derek Jones Jr.? Is that the move? Is like you put him on Derek because DJ will space you out as well. Like if they go to that kind of a look, it will cause the same problem for the Wolves that it created for every Rudy Gobert team in Utah, which is just like, if you can make sure that he can't hang out in the paint, you put him in an impossible position, and now it's 1-on-1. And against most teams, the Wolves are actually like, we're good with 1-on-1 defense. The problem is that how Luka's built versus how the Wolves wing defenders are built. Like if it's Donovan Mitchell in a 5-out, that's easier for the Wolves to handle. If it's even those minutes, if it was just like Kyrie Irving, it's one thing, but Luka's very different. Luka had a ton of turnovers in game 6, but he also started out 7 of 8 from the field.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of conversation. He looks healthier, but also like there was a very clear, like he had to turn his emotional mental side around. Like he talked about about finding out, like remembering the joy that he plays with this game, how much he loves the game of basketball. And that was very evident. And so I am penciling Luka in. I am wiping the slate clean on Luka Doncic. That even though like he might get worn down by the end of the series, and like I'm open to that. If Luka shows up in game 1, it's like, oh no, Luka can't move again. Guess what? Like the series swings way back towards the Wolves. Because he really is kind of like the pressure point here. But I think that's like a really key matchup. Part of I think what will happen when the Mavs are on offense. You talked about like, okay, Luka, go ahead, buddy. The problem with that is just like there is a mental breaking point when a
Yeah.
guy is killing you
Yep.
and it gets you a little out. If you're wondering about some of the pick and roll stuff, so Rudy doesn't play deep drop anymore. Unless it's like this is what's really credit, like, give Rudy Gobert all the credit in the world. He used to be only a deep drop dude. That's like Joel Embiid, where it's like he's gonna take 4 steps back and just be like, you can take mid range jumpers all you want, but I'm gonna wall off the paint and look very intimidating and grrr. Rudy's gotten much better about a high drop where he's still retreating to contain the space. Like Lively won't have as many lobs because Gobert's so good at playing in a high drop and like managing that space between with long arms to disrupt the lob. That's why the Nuggets couldn't get to that Gordon alley-oop so much. It's entirely because Rudy Gobert showed why he's a 4-time DPOY in that series. Like that was so impressive to me of how Rudy managed that space.
Yeah, the longer that series went on, if you're watching the defense and not the offense, you saw Minnesota repeatedly stop the Denver go-to plays because they they learned the rhythm. They cut the passing angles. They knew where things were going, and that's part of why this defense is so fun to watch.
It's true. One of the problems, though, with that is that the Mavericks are not as routine set oriented. It's a lot more chaotic. It's a lot more improvisation, in part just because like they don't need to have as much set stuff, because they just need to be like Luka go do stuff. Like that's a lot of their offense is like Luka go do stuff. Again, they have some good mechanisms built in. Kyrie too. They have some good mechanisms built in to these sets, but there is just like it's a lot more like, oh, like Lively wasn't cutting and then all of a sudden was like, oh, I see an angle, and then he's at the rim. And so if you start to overload, then you're in the situation where you're overloading to try and shut down Luka, and then you've got those reverse side to the corner threes for PJ Washington, who has never been a good corner shooter and is now shooting like 47% on them, and Derek Jones Jr., who has never been a good 3-point shooter and is shooting great on them. And if that stuff goes away, if the carriage turns back into a pumpkin on the Mavs shooting luck on both sides of the floor, then the Wolves are going to win the series because they have enough tactical advantages, and those moments will be very painful. However, I still think that Luka is going to be able to put enough pressure on to force those mechanisms, and I'm not willing to bet against it with everything else that we kind of have on the floor. Do you want to wrap up anything like on that, or can we move to Wolves on offense?
Yeah, just one more thought, and then I'll move us there. My 4 factors on this spot would actually really like the matchup for Minnesota. Dallas wants to shoot a ton of threes. Minnesota's a top 5 3-point defense. Dallas is top 5 2-point percentage. You know, I love that one. Minnesota's number 1 defensively in that area. Like all the stuff Dallas wants to do by the profile, Minnesota profiles well against. Other than I do think Dallas is going to get to the free throw line. Minnesota gets in foul trouble. I think we're going to see a lot of free throws both ways in this series. So maybe that makes home court a bigger factor, kind of swinging back and forth. The one note that, again, as a fan that gives me some bit of hope here, as I dug back into before the playoffs, the last like 30 years of when a defense is this good, when the defensive rating is like 5 points or better above the league average, what happens to those teams? And I've brought that up in all the series previews. That team rarely ever wins the championship. It usually gets to at least this round or the second round or the conference finals. It sometimes make the finals. It's a floor raise, but not a ceiling. But I looked also, when did that team lose? If they didn't win the championship, why did they lose? And consistently, every single time, that historically elite defense lost to a top 7 offensive team by offensive rating from the season, and usually top 5, often top 3. Dallas finished 10th offensively. Now, part of that's because they played me and you in game 82 and literally dropped like 2 or 3 spots from that game alone. So there's obviously noise in that rating. I think Dallas is right on the edge of what top 7 offensively means. I don't think Dallas is a top 3 offense. I don't think Dallas is an elite offense capable of lighting up this defense. So I think that it is a very defensive series. I think both defenses have a real advantage here. I think we're going to get a slow, ugly, grindy type series.
That's so funny. That's really funny because I have the exact opposite feel.
Really?
I think this is offensive centric.
Wow.
I think that both of these teams want to be good defenses, and then they're going to run up against these squads and be like, well, okay, maybe not.
So let's use that to transition to the Minnesota on offense then, because I think Minnesota, by the numbers for the season, has been a relatively average offense. The Wolves are here because of the defense. By the numbers, Dallas has had this big late season push, and now, frankly, held up in the playoffs. The Dallas defense looks very good. I still don't really, it doesn't pass the eye test the way Minnesota's defense passes the eye test.
Yep.
But the numbers keep on producing, and at some point I have to accept what's there. So talk to me about Minnesota on offense and some of the matchup stuff on that end.
So again, this is like what a twist, what a complex web we weave, right? Because I'm going to start here. I think the matchup is better for the Mavericks defending the Wolves' best player than it is for the Wolves defending the Mavericks. So I talked about all the Luka advantages. Derrick Jones Jr. So I talked about Jaden McDaniels, right? $190. DJJ is 210. So he is like the size that you want to defend Anthony Edwards. He won't get bumped off his spot. He does have that perimeter defensive ability. Ant might chase mismatches on switches. The Mavericks are really good about sending help and scrambling out of it back to the rim. The key there is that, what does that leave open? And it's wide open threes on the other side.
Yeah, agreed.
And when the Thunder miss all those, this Mavs defense, look at this Mavs defense. And I'm like, Isaiah Joe is a 42% 3-point shooter who just shot 31% on wide open threes. That's it. Right? Like that is it. I am not going to get off of this after redoing the tape on it. The Clippers and Thunder just missed shots. They just missed shots. And when you're like, yeah, but they weren't in rhythm. You think that because they missed. Because that's what we do. Is we're like, no, but those shots weren't in rhythm though. Versus if they knocked him down, man, the Mavs got to do something. They got to stop sending help. They can't leave this guy wide open. That's the difference in PJ Washington versus Lou Dort, a 39% 3-point shooter who shot 40% in the playoffs and then shot like 13% in the losses versus the Mavericks. Like, that's the difference here, is like when they hit him, man, the Mavericks just created great looks. I can't believe OKC's got to switch this up and not just leave them open versus the Mavericks. Oh, but those shots weren't in rhythm though. They were all stunted. Whatever it takes, the Mavericks have got it done. A very big swing in Game 7, and a reason I got that game wrong, because I had pretty good money on Denver, was I was like, Jaden McDaniels is not going to hit shots in Denver. He has not hit shots in the series all series long. He has been terrible on the road. That has been a huge problem. JMD had 27 points. Like, he was phenomenal. Attack closeouts on MPJ, hit open threes, like the works, right? If Jaden McDaniels has an awesome offensive series, the Wolves might and probably will win the series, because the Mavericks have to do a lot of the same kind of stuff of anybody but Ant. Like, that's the best strategy here. And if you're like, okay, but if they do that and they miss, how are this going to be an offensive series? Karl Anthony Towns, the Mavs have nothing for him.
Nothing.
Like, you could play Maxi Kleber. Kleber's a good defender. Cat can beat that, because the key is that Cat can shoot. So if Kleber wants to buck up in the post on him, fine. But Kleber's going to have to give him space as a help defender, and Cat can tear him up. This is absolutely a Karl Anthony Towns series. He should absolutely eat. So this, I'm like, look, you laugh, like, that's the thing here, right?
I'm laughing. I'm laughing out of nervous. This is fandom again. I just listened for the last 3 days to the entire national media cycle crown. Good job, Karl Anthony Towns. You made it. We all believe in you now. We collectively believe you are here and a 16-game player. And doggone it, I want to believe so hard. I was so happy, among all the other reasons, most of all for Karl Anthony Towns, for all he's come through, for what he's been for this franchise. You're absolutely right. He is a guy that should dominate this series, to the point that I looked up Karl Anthony Towns' MVP odds for this series. I think that should be in play with what he should be able to do here. I think if you like the Wolves and like that bet, that's not a bad angle for you. I'm ready to believe the Wolves. I don't think I'm quite there yet with my guy Cat. I still need like one more series of convincing, but I laughed because it's so terrifying that I agree with you. I just don't know if I believe in the outcome getting there.
I think that Nuggets fans and Suns fans were very much like, Karl Anthony Towns is going to beat us. Okay, sure, Jan. And then he did it. And so much of it is about game plan discipline. If the Mavs, so here's a big key. The Mavs do want to switch a little bit. They don't switch all the time, but they switch a fair amount. They probably switch more than Denver does on ball. Denver switches a ton off ball. Denver will switch a lot in non-1-5s, and it's the same kind of deal, honestly, with Mavericks. It's like the Mavericks will switch a little bit. And so you will have these possessions where you can get Cat in a post-up mismatch versus Kyrie Irving, Luka Doncic, Jaden McDaniels, Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Sorry, not Jaden McDaniels. Those are on the Timberwolves. Where you can do it versus Luka and Kyrie, or you can get him versus even DJJ or Josh Green. Yeah. You can get him in those matchups, and if Cat continues to play balanced, careful, like 2 dribbles, take a little turnaround hook, don't put your shoulder into him, don't risk the offensive foul, just get to your move, he will eat the same way that he did versus Jamal Murray and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope in the last series. This is a great series for Karl Anthony Towns. But one of the problems here, if we get back to the Dallas side, is, okay, who does an offensive series benefit? No matter how much the Mavericks have switched to a defensive identity team, somewhere in there, buried deep down, is still the same fraud-ass defense, let's cook offensively team the Mavericks have always been. And I kind of think that that's what they're going to be in this series. And for Minnesota, here's a balance. Here is a little bit of a balance. So you and I were in the same place on offensive floor is so low for Minnesota. I had some Wolves fans bucking up to me in my mentions, and I was ready to go to war with them. I was like, your offensive floor is so low. And they were like, look at the non-turnover numbers. And I was like, okay. And it turns out that their offensive rating, when they don't turn the ball over, is really good. It turns out that they're a better 3-point shooting team than I thought by a mile.
Yeah, number 2 in the league in 3-point percentage this year, which sounds great till you remember that OKC was number 1 and that didn't work against Dallas, but it feels good for now.
Right. And so like that's the question here. Like that is part of this is this is part of why I got to with Dallas. There are a lot of ways I can see them winning. Like one of them is the same shit that happened to the Clippers and the Thunder just happens to Dallas. For whatever, like, I am done with like, well, that's not going to hold up. That won't work. That's not going to hold up. It won't hold up over the course of a season. They don't need it to. They need it to happen 4 more times. They just need, like, man, the Wolves just could not hit a shot. And then I'm going to have Mavericks fans being like, that's that elite Mavericks defense. And I'm like, they're wide open. But like, it only has to happen 4 more times. And if you want to be like, yeah, but Matt, okay, that's like okay. It's hit. Coin's been heads 4 times. Is it going to go 4 out of 8 more?
No, that's not a thing. That's not how that goes.
Right. Again, that's not how it goes. But my counter on that is, all right, but Dallas can then also switch if this is an offensive series, right? This needs to be like the Wolves are pretty simple. They want games to be we score, you don't. You know, like the Pacers want it to be like they're very much like no, we're good. If you score, we score. We're good there. That's fine for us, right? The Wolves are like, we score, you don't. If you score, we score, you might win. And if you don't score, we don't score, you might win. The Wolves need it both ways. The Mavericks, I don't think, need it as much, which is one of the reasons why I don't like the matchup. If there was a better counter for Luka, I would feel drastically different. This really is I have a nasty feeling that all of my Luka Doncic slander is going to get absolutely thrown in my face. Yeah. For after this series, as everyone's like, Luka Doncic is now the best player in the world, because it sure as shit isn't going to be Jason Tatum. And so if it's not Ant and Luka makes the finals, Luka takes the crown. And then Brandon Anderson, even though your Wolves lose and it's a heartbreaker, you still get to rub that in my face. So this is a win-win for you in some regards.
I guess I'll take that if we get there. I think it's interesting because I think you and I are effectively breaking down the matchup analysis about the same way. We're just interpreting you're calling it an offensive series, I'm calling it a defensive series, but I think we're interpreting actually the same thing, but calling it differently. The one other thing, Minnesota's offense, I want to comment on before we come back to that. I do think this is, again, where the depth advantage could be very significant for Minnesota. Every series is different, but Tim Hardaway Jr. is basically out of the rotation by the end of that last series, and is a dude that Dallas actively wants off of its team. Dante Exum is out of the rotation. Jaden Hardy stinks. He's not ready yet. I don't know. Maybe they'll try him on Ant, but he's not. He's going to turn it over. He can't play against this defense. I promise you, he's not ready against this defense yet. So Dallas doesn't have a lot of options. They've got the backup center, but that's basically just Lively Gafford is the one center. Minnesota's got options. They've got Nas off the bench. He had great moments against Denver, game after game. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Kyle Anderson we talked about. I don't really know how much we're going to get from Monty Morris, Jordan McLaughlin. That's probably Wolves fandom seeping in. But those first three guys are real options of different lineups, different sort of looks, defenders, scorers. I do think the depth advantage is there, though. Let's not forget Mike Conley in the last week just missed a game because of a calf injury. Please stay healthy, Mike. Let's not forget Daniel Gafford got banged up in game 6, didn't play it down the stretch. And Derek Lively came into the playoffs injured. I want a healthy series here. Mike Conley went out. Minnesota's offense had no idea what to do because Ant couldn't do everything and they ran out of options. That swung very badly for Minnesota. If Gafford or Lively ends up missing at all sometime, that is a huge size advantage now that Minnesota has, and I think that could really swing things quickly too. So I do want to keep an eye on the depth thing. I think to the point about is this an offense series or a defense series, I think all that we're really disagreeing on is I think the series is set up well for it's got to be Ant and it's got to be Cat, and I think you do too. And I think the series is set up well for it's got to be Luka, and I think you do too. I just feel to me, that means it's a defensive series because it's down to just all right, Stars got to do some stuff. But as I evaluate the series and where I'm at as to what side is the right side, in my way of framing, if it's a defensive series or whatever you want to call it, if it's on the Stars, okay, which Stars do I want? Am I ready to go all in on Ant as the best player in the series, in a series with Luka and Kyrie? Am I ready to go Ant and Cat against Luka and Kyrie? Right now, by the numbers, by the playoff numbers, there's a case for the Minnesota guys. But I think that's the case you have to make to like Minnesota in the series. So let me ask you that. We do the player hierarchy thing. Right now, health considered, matchup, everything, for this series right now, is Anthony Edwards in this series number 1, number 2, or number 3? And which tier is he in that group for the players?
He's in the top tier. He's just number 2.
But he's closer to Luka. Kyrie 3, so he's closer to Luka than Kyrie, but he's in that tier.
Yes. So I'll just be I'll be pretty straight up here. Look, Kyrie Irving is maybe the most skilled player to ever play the game. When people talk about him, that I'm not I don't roll my eyes. I'm yeah, no, there's a real argument there. Kyrie has played better team basketball this year than he ever has. I am never going to stop waiting for the other shoe to drop. I'm sorry. I've watched this guy's career. I've watched him absolutely melt teams. I have watched him destroy franchises. He has a longer kill list than Kevin Durant. They teamed up for a while, which was amazing. In terms of guys they've gotten fired. Okay.
They deserved each other.
But he's been the professional in Dallas. He's been great. There's so many good vibes. What could possibly go wrong? Especially if they make the finals with the kind of questions he'll be asked there about world events. I don't put Kyrie Irving in that top tier, and I think that the gap between him and Karl Anthony Towns is so much smaller than probably most people would think.
Yeah, that was my next question, because I think that's the question is if it's Luka ahead of Ant and it's Kyrie ahead of Cat, there's more players. It's not 2-on-2, but that
right?
is a tough hurdle to get past if
Yep.
that's the order that you see them in.
Yeah. So here's like an interesting way to kind of like break it down is like they both have tier 1 players. The Mavs have the edge. They both have tier 2 players. The Wolves have more of them. In Rudy has to go in that category as well. The Mavericks do not. They have only one guy, Kyrie Irving. The tier 3 is where this gets really interesting because it's like Jaden McDaniels, Nas, Mike. Those are all tier 3 guys, which are really good. And then on the Mavericks side, it's PJ Washington. That's it. Like, so here's the thing: the Wolves have if we talk about like the top of this list, those top 3 tiers, they have more guys in these top 3 tiers. They have way more guys in the top 3 tiers than the Mavericks do. An interesting kind of element in the series is going to be, and I'm growing here, Brandon, because I'm acknowledging offensive rebounding matters. Offensive rebounding is like a huge part in this series. Gafford kills the Mavericks with offensive rebounds. The Mavericks kill, or the Wolves kill every team with offensive rebounds. And so a thing I took from the Knicks series, though, if you go back and you look at those numbers, and we talked about how, like, yes, injuries were a big part of that series. But if you look at how the Pacers were able to pull that off, like what did they do with the offensive rebounds? They still got killed on the offensive glass. What did they do? They started offensive rebounding too.
Yep.
Because it's very rare that you're a great offensive and defensive rebounding team, especially if you have the ability to pull over Rudy as a help defender. And that opens up the weak side. If Luka is able to do that, then Gafford and Lively are going to be able to get those offensive rebounds, and that balances that out a little bit. But those are some of like the little tiny details that I think are going to be key in the series.
Yeah, I agree. The offensive rebounding thing, you said earlier, it's really hard to take much from the season series. I agree. Like that's normally where I start, and I think that's a bit why I'm a little lost on the series. Both teams got a lot of offensive rebounds in those matchups. Yep. So that is to me one thing that would make sense to carry over. We also saw a lot of free throws in those matchups, which I think is another thing that would make sense to carry over. Minnesota should get to the line as well. I would tier things a little differently on the players thing, and I think that's why I see the series slightly differently. I would say Luka Ant, but Luka is ahead. I'd say Kyrie Cat, specifically Cat in this matchup, who I'm bumping up a little bit, but I still have Kyrie ahead.
That's fair.
But then I'm going to cheat a little bit, I acknowledge, but I'm going to put the player I'm calling Gaffley, Daniel Gafford, and Derek Lively. They're 48 minutes. That's one player. I'm putting that player in the Rudy tier, but I'm putting Rudy ahead. Rudy's clearly ahead. He's the better version of that. But I'm putting that, like, that's my tier 3. Just those 2 guys. And I think, like, Conley, PJ, and whoever after that, we're too far down the list, and there are definitely more Minnesota guys in that group. But tier 1, Dallas is ahead. Tier 2, Dallas is ahead. Tier 3 and tier 4, Minnesota takes the lead. I'm sorry, it's basketball. You want the stars. You don't want to be the team that has the lead on the tiers down the list and the bottom of the pyramid. That's not how the star basketball sport goes. And so I don't like it. We see where I'm heading on this one, Matt. It's not going to go well for me. Before I want to talk about game 1 after game 7. I did some research on this morning, so I've got some good trends. Before that, I don't know if there's a lot to say on this, but perhaps just to acknowledge, to give a little bit of flowers. Talk to me about the coaching matchup in this one. Where are we at on Jason Kidd and Chris Finch?
So if you had told me before the playoffs began that the Western Conference Finals was going to be Mavericks, Wolves, I would have been, I am betting Wolves NBA title futures out the wazoo. Give me Anthony Edwards Finals MVP. Give me Anthony Edwards Western Conference Finals MVP. Give me Cat Western Conference Finals MVP. Massive coaching advantage. Like, that's so huge. You get Jason Kidd versus Chris Finch. Jason Kidd's beating the charges, man. He outcoached Ty Lue. I talked about the adjustment with playing Maxi in those 4-5 combos. Versus the Thunder, he got to the lineups that he needed to. He managed the rotations. He was able to keep things where that series needed to. He had a very good game plan discipline in terms of not overreacting when SGA had so many big games. That's a lot of it is like, you have to reassert over and over and over and over and over again to your guys, I know it's tough. I know he's doing great. We can win. It's fine. Just keep competing. stick with the game plan. And the Mavericks have. Like, they just have. And Kidd has had little small tweaks, whether it's some of the coverage that they ran or who they've dared. Like, do I think it's shot variance? Yes. Like, the Lou Dort question is like a fascinating one, because everybody, like, if it depends on what you think of Lou Dort. If you're just like, Lou Dort sucks, I'm not worried about him as a shooter at all, then you're like, see? And if you're like me and you're like, Lou Dort's worked a lot on being an open 3-point shooter, and he shot 39% this year and was shooting 40% in the playoffs, he just missed good looks, then it's like the Mavericks didn't really do anything. They just won a gamble. They bet on something that was not likely and came out ahead. But they came out ahead. And so I am forced, with the way that he has adjusted his rotations and the small things that he has done and the way he has his team playing, I am forced. Like, Jason Kidd won a series where Luka Doncic played like shit. I didn't think that was remotely possible. In any series versus any opponent, did I think Jason Kidd could win a series where Luka Doncic played like garbage? He did. So now I have to call this. I would give, like, if you're like, you squirt gun to your head, you got to pick one. I'm picking Finch every time. I don't have to think about it. Chris Finch is a better coach than Jason Kidd. Jason Kidd has been one of the best coaches in these playoffs. I cannot give the Wolves a significant coaching edge here.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that. Jason Kidd's been very good. I wanted to just to give us a chance to acknowledge that, and you have more on it than me. So I want to transition into the what does it look like for coming off of a Game 7 thing, because we've talked about that a lot in the past. Our friend and colleague Raheem Palmer has his stats up on his Twitter, an article that he wrote at Action Network a few years ago about teams coming off of Game 7. And Jason Kidd kind of dovetails nicely into this, because this is a spot where, look, I think both you and I think this series is very close. I think these teams are pretty close. I would, in a neutral setting, neutral court, I would lean slightly toward Minnesota. It sounds to me like you might lean slightly toward Dallas, but the little things are going to matter a lot here. And this weird Game 1 rest disadvantage coming off of a Game 7 spot is a big potential swing factor. So here's some of the numbers. Jason Kidd, nothing to do with Game 7. Jason Kidd is 2-7 ATS and straight up in Game 1. And now, obviously, this overlaps a lot. Luka Doncic, in his first game of a series for his career, 1-6 straight up when Luka Doncic plays, all on the road for those games. And I'm counting, like, this is actually Luka playing. So the series that he started missing and then came back in, he's lost all but one of his first game in a series. So that's the background here. I don't want to back Dallas. That should set up well for Minnesota. That said, this is the most rested Luka is going to be for any game this series. It's all one day in between, all the way to the finish line, I believe. And here's the data off of Game 7. So from Evan Abrams, teams in the last 20 years that are coming off of a Game 7 against teams who are not, so that would be Minnesota here. Those teams from his data are 16, 30, and 1 against the spread, 35% in that Game 1 spot. So it's a very tough spot. So I dug into the numbers a little further this morning, and I'm just going to say up front, this is the smallest of small samples. We're talking about Game 7, and I'm going to parse even further. So all the caveats and all the red flags to that this data is not a huge, meaningful sample. But I don't want to just know, are you coming off of a Game 7? Think back to our last coming off of Game 7. Cleveland beat Orlando in a Game 7 and then played Boston. And guess what happened? Boston ran them off the court, because part of the reason a team plays Game 7 frequently is because they're not that great of a team. And you took all 7 games just to barely outlast another not great team opponent. That was the Cleveland scenario, and Boston blew them off the court. I want to know what it looks like when the team that won Game 7 is the favorite in Game 1. Because that's a lot less common, and that's the situation that we have here. So, Matt, I have the data for you. Only for just the last decade, we have had 13 spots where we have a home favorite in Game 1, like Minnesota, that just won in Game 7. The data is grim. the home favorite in that spot just for the last decade is 5-8 ATS, 5-8 straight up as the home favorite.
Yeah.
That is not great for Minnesota. Now, the good part is that team that's the favorite is still 7-6 in the series. That's not great because you want the favorite to be better than 7-6, not just above 500. However, dig a little deeper. 4 of our 13 series, both teams were coming off a game 7. That's not Dallas. Dallas not coming off a game 7. They had a chance. They avoided it. If you take those 4 out, the favorite, Minnesota, goes to only 3-6 in the series. So again, very small sample. The numbers don't mean a lot, but the numbers tell me what I would have thought that they might be. That like, okay, this is danger. This is danger to possibly blow. You have home court advantage. You still get it in game 7 if you get there. Many of these series, I went through one by one, they're not getting to game 7 a lot. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 times out of the 13 did it even get to a game 7. That's when you want the home game 7. But guess what? If you blow game 1, now Dallas gets home game 7 because they're home game 6 and they got there and you never made it to your game 7. So I'm teetering on the edge of thinking that Dallas is probably the better value play anyway. And if that's the case, and they're in this prime, delicious game 1 spot, I think that is a significant factor that can like swing the way you view an entire series. So I thought that was worth a whole section here.
Yes.
Do you think I'm overreaching on the game 1 thing?
No, I don't at all. In part because you knew I was going to, because I'm not as sensitive to small sample as you are. Conference favorites. Conference finals. Game 1 home faves off of game 7. Okay. Let's narrow it down to that because conference finals, this is a chance for the NBA finals. And most of the time you're facing pretty good teams. 2-5 straight up since 2003. Look, 7 games. I get it. But for me, Brandon, it's less about the sample as it is the complete reversal of the other trend, which is home favorites smash.
Exactly.
Like, they dominate in terms of straight up spread. We can talk about that's market adjusted, but like they dominate in these kind of games. And to put that in perspective, home favorites when they're not off of a game 7 in game 1, when they're in any like 1-6, 5-4, whatever in the conference finals, game 1, 119-60 at 67%. So it's like, all these other games, the conference finals home favorite game 1 is a great look. They're 51.4% against the spread. It's not profitable based off of the juice, but if you got even money on it, you'd be able to, if you got a minus 100 on it, you would come out ahead, right?
And I can tell you right now, without looking too, that trend that you just said for conference finals is even stronger in the finals. Like you bet the home team in game 1 of the finals always. You always do. They're like 15-3 ATS the last the 18 matchup. So yeah, you want the home game 1 team. You want them badly, except in this scenario.
And so if we say we have to at least acknowledge that coming off of the game 7, which I will again note this, the Mavericks were really happy to beat the Thunder, and they talked a little bit too much. They were like, you guys do not know how hard this series was. And I'm kind of like, I don't know, guys. Like, they're a college team. Maybe you should settle down a little bit. The Wolves beat the defending champions on their home floor, and they had every reason in the world to celebrate. Karl Anthony Towns was literally asked about the next round and said, man, we're just happy in this moment. We just want to stay here. That's a warning sign. That's a huge warning sign. The Wolves, I will tell you, absolutely celebrated like this was a finals win. And they have 2 days for Finch to get them right.
Yeah.
But it's not just that they're off of a game 7. This is a massive emotional letdown spot.
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely huge. We talked about this yesterday with the Pacers, but I want to hammer it home because we actually think the Mavericks might win this game. Teams that win game 1 on the road. These are the dogs. They don't have home court to start the series. Are 29-12. 71% to win the series via whowins.com. I bet our action Slack jumped on Mavericks game 1 Wolves series, I'm bought out of it. Because I was like, wait. If the Mavericks win game 1,
yeah,
they have home court.
that's. I looked at the exact same bet. I had the exact same instinct of like, okay, well, I kind of lean toward Wolves, but I like this Dallas game 1 spot. So just smash them together. That sounds great. I'll just up my odds. Oh, plus 500? What a great way to just juice my odds. And I was like, well, wait a second. Let's logic this through. If you lose game 1, you've lost a lot. You've lost like the big edge, the whole home court thing that we've been giving you. I will say though, in the data I looked at over the last decade, the teams coming off of game 7 when they were favored in game 1, teams that lost game 1 still went 4-4 in the series. So again, very small sample, but like that's not impossible within that very small set of if Minnesota loses game 1, this recent history still says, you're still actually 4-4 is a great outcome because now you're down 0-1. So that's actually a very positive outcome that those teams still came back. It's all very small, but it is not insignificant how much game 1 sets the tone for the whole thing. Because if Minnesota, if the Luka game 1 thing and the Jason Kidd game 1 thing is an actual thing and the Wolves get over the line, then I think that we have to reevaluate the series a little bit because you suddenly got game 1 and everything is kind of back in order again.
Yes. Yeah, look, if the Wolves come out and jump on them like they jumped on Phoenix and Denver, right? Like we do have a history with the Wolves here of like in this playoffs, they have come out and just kicked the crap out of teams in the first 8 minutes of the game. And again, I'll get back into this thing where from a single game betting perspective, think of how many times you could have done this, including down 20 in game 7. The most give up time imaginable. If the Wolves go down early, look for spots to live bet them. You can bet them spread. You can bet them money line. They are the third quarter take me home team. They are so good in these third quarters. And so if Dallas gets a big lead in game 1, I will absolutely look at a spot to try and form a middle on the Wolves. Like I'm hoping for like a 29-12 start for the Mavericks and there's just like massive overreactions. And then I will absolutely come back in on, I've already bet, like you're going to hear Brandon on best bets for game 1 with Jim Turvey in tomorrow's episode. I'll give you mine right now. Like I'm on Mavericks money line. I'm on Mavericks spread. I'm on Mavericks alt spread. Like this is a big part of the series, but I like the spot, the matchup, everything here. So I'm willing to go ahead and be like, I could be wrong. I was heavy on Denver in game 7. I went in and felt like such a genius at halftime. I was like, look at me, called this one, took the home team in game 7. And then they blew the biggest lead in game 7 history. So like, could be wrong. I will absolutely look for games for comeback spots for the Wolves throughout the series, but most particularly, especially against this Dallas team, I think there is a lot of variance here. So you kind of said at the beginning that you were like taking the over on games.
Yeah.
You have like these kind of leans. You were looking for me to kind of talk you into it. I think it really does get down to what we talked about with, if you think that this is an offensive series, you should go my direction with Mavericks. If you think that this is a defensive series, you should go Wolves. I do think it's really that simple. As much as Mavericks fans are going to be like, we have an elite defense, I am telling you, it is not as good as the numbers say. Like I've done the film work, I've watched all the clips, I know all these ins and outs. They have gotten great results, and I'm not saying that they haven't executed well. I'm not saying that like guys are missing layups. They have definitely done a great job protecting the rim. Like they've done an awesome job protecting the rim. But there's holes. I just don't know if the Wolves can make them pay for it. So much of it's like, can Jaden McDaniels hit wide open corner threes? Can NAW hit wide open corner threes? Can Karl Anthony Towns space the floor effectively and avoid foul trouble? I want to say that too. The whistle matters so much in this series for both teams. If Luka is able to get the Wolves in foul trouble, it's curtains. That's a nightmare. That's the Wolves offense going against a set defense. And it means that they're going to be able to take out key components with foul trouble, right? If Ant picks up, like if they put Ant on Luka, which might be their best tactic, and Luka just grifts his way into 3 foul calls, it's over. I don't know that they can beat him with just Cat. On the other side, if Rudy is just like picking up foul calls and all of a sudden the Mavericks are like, we're out of centers. Like Gafford has 4, Lively has 4. We're running out here.
Yeah.
I don't know what they do. And that gets into like Rudy Gobert was great at the stripe in the last series. Does that continue in this series? There are these margins that will cost you. I was talking to somebody with the Nuggets and they were lamenting the fact of like it was a game 7 and we had a 20-point lead. And if you look back along the way from the Spurs series on, or from the Spurs game on, we just lost so many margin plays. So many things in the margins we lost. And like that can decide the series as well. I don't think that the Mavericks are going to run over them. I like -1.5 because, again, if they take game 1, they can close out in 6. And so I like the -1.5 escalator. Best bet's definitely Mavericks on the series price. After we've done this, have you moved at all before we do props before we get out of here?
Yeah, so my best bet is over 5.5 games. It's -160. That's 62% implied. This is the bet that I wanted to make the last 2 rounds on Dallas, but didn't because I don't like the -160. I wanted to get more aggressive. I think what you said is right. That this is a series that there's going to be, as I thought with other Dallas series, it's going to go back and forth. They're going to be back and forth game to game. They're going to be back and forth within the game. Luka has played in 7 series now. He has gone 6 games or more in all but one of those. So I think this is a long series. He is now 6-1 ATS against a series spread in theory. I think it's a very coin flippy sort of series. The Minnesota I like a little better, but the game 1 negation thing kind of offsets that, maybe more than offsets it. So how do I lose my over 5.5? I don't honestly think that Dallas can make me lose that bet. Even if Dallas gets game 1, then Minnesota gets game 2, Dallas gets its home game 3 and 4. Do I still think Dallas is going to come back to Minnesota having won 3 or 4 and win 1 more, and that's the series and I lost the bet? No. I just don't think that. I think these teams are closer than Dallas winning 3 in a row to end it. Minnesota gets game 1. They hold in game 2. They steal 1 in Dallas, and they close out. I don't think that's the most likely scenario. I think that's possible. So that's how my under 5.5 would lose here instead of the over that I want. So here's the bet that I think I should be considering as my escalator. And I need you to help me. I need you to push me over the line if you think it's right, because my heart can't make this bet, but tell me if my wallet should. I don't think the Mavs can win in 4 or in 5. So if it's an over 5.5 games, I don't need that in my Mavs bet. I don't need the Mavs series bet you're making. I only want Mavs in 6 or in 7. Mavs in 6 plus 500. Mavs in 7 plus 750. Combined is plus 252. 28% implied. The Mavs series price is plus 150. I only need Dallas to win in 6 or 7 in like 70% of their series wins. I think it's much higher than that. And now if I think that's basically representing the entire way Dallas wins, I absolutely think Dallas has more than 28% chance to win the series. So I think here's where my conclusion is. My best bet is the over 5.5. I think it is the right bet based on how I feel about the series to bet Mavs in 6 or 7, but I'm going to hedge my heart with it by saying that that's the right bet to make right now because of how I like game 1 for Dallas. Because if I'm right, those odds immediately move heavily in my favor, and I got options. Now I can come back with Minnesota if I need to, and I can build the portfolio out. I can, because I like the game 1 Dallas spot a lot, and that will tease where I'm at with Jim Turvey on the game 1 pod, I think I have to invest in a Dallas outcome right now. And to me, the Dallas outcome is Dallas in a long series. That's my explanation on it. Mavs in 6 or 7 is the best bet that my wallet wants to get to. What do you think of how I got there?
I think you should just do the Mavs series bet because you need to buy yourself injury insurance. Like that's what you're getting with Mavs on the series price plus 140. Like that's what you're getting there. Is you're why did the Celtics win versus the Heat in 5 games? Let's be really honest. Why did they win in 5 games?
I didn't watch, so you tell me.
Jimmy Butler was hurt. Why did the Celtics win versus the Cavaliers in 5 games? Because Donovan Mitchell was hurt.
Yeah, well, those aren't the same though. Butler was hurt before the series.
Sure. Why did the Indiana Pacers get past the New York Knicks? Why did the Indiana Pacers get past the Milwaukee Bucks? Like, we like the matchup, right? We like the matchup for Bucks Pacers. But like the injuries, and you're right, there was injury problems going in. You're absolutely right. That's baked into the series price. I just don't think what I would hate for is like you're just leaving yourself such a wide open gap here of Ant gets banged up or something horrific, God forbid, please Jesus, no. And then or Cat. Like, think about how important we've talked about with Cat in the series. Or foul trouble. Like, there's just so many ways where it's like this one game winds up ripping up 6 and 7, where it's you get so many chances here for the Dallas outcome.
If my best bet, my most confident take on the series is over 5.5 games, I'm not going off of that. That's the thing that I am believing in the series. If that's true, then if I also think Dallas is the value play by the numbers here, I did not do it the last 2 rounds because Dallas wasn't priced as the value play. If I'm over 5.5 games, so I'm already giving up the injury thing in the short series. It's gone. I've lost it. I lost the insurance. If I've already lost that, then I think Dallas 6 or 7 is the right play and not just the Dallas price.
Okay. I hear you. I get it. You're right. If that's your prior, then you got to get there, because I can't argue against that, because it's the same as me where I'm like, look, do I think Dallas wins game 1? I do. So I have to, like, that was where a lot of this was like, if I like Dallas so much in game 1, I have to like them for the series. I was already there because I liked it for the matchup perspective. Do you have prop plays for the series?
Yeah, just a couple of real quick ones that I like. Anthony Edwards at one book is plus 100 so even odds to have at least one 40-point game. So Ant, I wanted to get there on Ant to lead the series in scoring. He's at just over 30 for the postseason. Luka's at 27. Luka's favored there. I think that's one that you might kind of watch as the series goes along, and you might be able to go either side. And to score 40 once, he's done that now in 3 straight series, at least one time. He's scored at 40 points or more in 4 of the last 15 playoff games. So you just want the math. If that's the math, 27%, 4 to 15. If we get 6 games, as I expect, that would make it 85% likely by just the numbers that Ant would get at least one 40-point game. Now, that's not fair. Those aren't the actual real numbers, but I would make this more like 70% likely, and we're getting even odds. And look, this is a fun bet. Who doesn't want to bet Ant to score 40 in a game of the series? Like, that's just fun to root for. It's a fun bet. You can, in another book, bet him to score 50 in a game at 12 to 1. That's not going to hit, but it's a really fun escalator. So if you just want to have some fun, bet Ant to score 40, nibble a little on 50, be the youngest one ever to do so in a playoff game. So I like that one. And then here's my moonshot. You can bet on, we do the points leaders, we do the rebound leader and the assist leaders. Not every book has this. If your book offers it, blocks leader for the series. This is my bet. Matt, who do you think between these two teams, by the numbers so far, who do you think leads in blocks per games between all the players available?
Is it Luka?
It's not Luka. That would be funny. It is, in fact, Derek Jones Jr. He is averaging 1.4 blocks a game. That's not very much, and that's the point. I think a blocks leader might literally have like 8 in the series rather than 7 or 6 that whoever the runner-up is. Derek Jones Jr. is 50 to 1 to lead the series in blocks. Nice. He's had at least 1 block in 10 of 12 playoff games. If the floor is 1 and I only average 1.4, getting to 1 is very meaningful. If I get 1 every game, oops, I got 3-1 game. I'm the leader now. And guess what? His best game of the season with 3 blocks, he did 5 times, once against Minnesota. Good enough for me. I'll take it. Rudy Gobert's blocks are a little down the last few playoffs. Dallas doesn't get blocked a whole lot anyway. Derek Jones Jr., 50 to 1, blocks leader. That's my moonshot.
Love it. That's great. I have a surprising amount of player props in this series, which I usually don't. Luka is only minus 115 to lead the series in scoring. You can get that out there. That's got to be based off of kind of how his down performance has been in the playoffs. If you're like me and you're like, I saw something in the last 2 games that makes me think that he's going to have this turned around, that's a really good value as a baseline performance for you to be able to finance other bets, which I will do when I take Karl Anthony Towns 20 to 1 to win to lead the series in scoring. Look, it's entirely possible that our cap is wrong. We're wrong all the time. We're pretty open about that. if I'm wrong and it's like this is an Ant series and not a Cat series, fair enough. But if I believe that Cat is as good in this series as I think it is, I do think Cat can do things like score 40 in a game, have 35, average 28. I think Cat will have a consistently easier time in every single part of this game than he did versus the Nuggets. Like, they don't have an Aaron Gordon to be able to defend him the same way. They are PJ Washington is not a good matchup for Towns. That's an easy one for Towns to be able to exploit, and they will be able to get switches and all these things that we've talked about. So I like 20-1 there. I think it's either Luka or Towns, and then it'll be Kyrie, and I'll be mad. One more.
You're not even counting Ant as an option for scoring leader? That's who I think it is. You need to list him as an option.
No, he's not. I don't think he's. I do not. I do not think.
All right.
Those coaches are going to have watched the Denver series and watched what happened to Minnesota's offense when the Nuggets effectively deployed anybody but Ant. There's going to have to be like a consideration of that. They have. I know this sounds crazy. I get it. The Dallas Mavericks have better personnel to guard Anthony Edwards than the Denver Nuggets did with KCP and Aaron Gordon. Those are bad physical matchups for him. One more. Yep. Jaden McDaniels plus 800 lead the series in steals.
Okay.
So I talked about how like Jaden's not going to do well versus Luka. One of the reasons I took under 5.5 in the very first series for the Wolves versus the Suns was if Chris Finch makes adjustments, this series goes short. That he's going to kill that team. And if he doesn't, the Suns are going to kill the Wolves. Guess what? He made the adjustments. Okay. I think Chris Finch is smart enough that by game 3, he's going to be like, all right, Jaden's not the guy here. Like, we're getting killed. We got to keep Kyle Anderson, who, again, I killed last series. That was not the series for him. I said over and over. I was like, I think he can play versus Mavs. Kyle Anderson plays Luka for the majority. They'll switch up with a couple of other guys. They'll try and figure out an option. I don't think Naz Reid is it, Joe, but they will try and find some sort of option. There are, I think, some ideas that they can kind of get to there. What they will do is all of those weak side corner threes when they start blitzing Luka. The big difference in OKC and Minnesota is their matchup zone on the weak side. So you have 3 guys strong side and 2 guys trying to guard between 2 and 3 players on the opposite. You have to crash down and you have to be able to recover to the outside. And you have to pick between those guys. But the difference is that Jaden McDaniels, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Mike Conley, and Anthony Edwards are really, really good because of the coaching that they've been under at understanding the timing for how to pick off those passes that PJ Washington got clean. If there's an edge here for them to balance all this out and make me look like an idiot, it might be as simple as the Wolves are better at weak side defense than Oklahoma City. So steals can just be generated. We saw what Jaden was able to do versus the dribble. I think he'll give Kyrie fits as good as Kyrie's handle is. And I think he'll be able to pick off those weak side passes. That combo at 8-1 is enough for me to bet Jaden McDaniels to lead the series in steals.
I like it. I think it's interesting. I'm just looking at past series to see. So Ant and Jokic had 11 steals to lead the series last round. Ant led the previous round also with 8. So I think my only hesitation would be this. I'm worried as you are about Jaden defending Luka, and I'm worried about him getting the foul trouble. And so if he's just not out there enough to get the steals, that would be a concern. So I think just looking at my brief looking at the data, I think Ant possibly to get some of those just because he's going to be out there and grinding a lot. But I think it's very fun that we've concluded our last preview before the finals with a steals leader and a blocks leader.
Yes.
You're going to get like the leader's going to have literally like 7 of this in the entire series. And you got to watch all 48 minutes, 6 games to find out who wins.
Let's sweat it. All right. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate you guys being with us. My thanks to David Payne for hanging us out with us today and help us out with production side, as well as Hutton Jackson, the video crew, which you can find the video version of this podcast on youtube.com/The Action Network. Tomorrow, best bets for game 1 of the Western Conference Finals with Brandon Anderson and Jim Turvey, as well as tomorrow in the afternoon, you'll be able to catch Game 2 of the Eastern Conference Finals, best bets. We'll have that for you tomorrow. Buckets live after games 1 and 2, or games 1 of both the Eastern and Western Conference. That'll be directly following those games. Download the Action Network app. Enjoy the conference finals. Till we see you again, let's get buckets.